OK. Il y a des émotions, je ne veux pas cacher les émotions. Je ne peux pas cacher les émotions, mais je vais continuer très professionnellement. J'essaierai. Quel grand honneur, quelle joie de recevoir cette émouvante distinction de la part de Sciences Po, une institution universitaire avec une telle brillante histoire et si influente au niveau national et international. Je suis également reconnaissante à Jeanne Lazarus et au formidable département qui est ici, beaucoup de vous, de sociologie, et vous contribuez à notre discipline en général et spécifiquement à l'économie sociologique avec des travaux superlatifs. Et je remercie tellement à Jeanne pour cet éloge. Et de ma part, je connais et admire Jeanne's investigation, spécialement ses efforts d'établir des liens entre les études sur la financialisation et sur l'économie domestique, aussi bien que sa considération de la moralité des transactions financières. Jeanne et ses collègues à Sciences Po font part d'une revigorée sociologie économique. Et aussi, je voudrais remercier Marina Abelskaya-Graziani, qui est par là pour faciliter si efficacement et avec tant de gentillesse ma visite. Dans quelques instants, je reviendrai au sujet de la sociologie économique. Mais entre-temps, permettez-moi quelques remarques personnelles qui expliqueront en partie mon plaisir d'être ici. Et Jeanne vous a averti déjà. Et averti, non? Oui. OK. Née en Argentine, d'une mère française et d'un père argentin, j'ai grandi dans un monde bilingue, français-espagnol, bien avant d'aborder autre langue. Mon grand-père, Simon Veil, né à Paris, rue Baudin, 1879, ingénieur agronome, émigré en Argentine au début du XXe siècle pour diriger une entreprise agricole, a reçu la Légion d'honneur pour sa participation dans la Première Guerre mondiale. Dans mon cas, émigrée aux États-Unis après mes premières études universitaires, je suis devenue, peut-être paradoxalement, spécialiste de l'histoire culturelle et économique américaine. Mais deux éléments inattendus m'ont rappelé mes racines françaises. D'abord, la traduction française de mon livre « La signification sociale de l'argent », préfacé de Jérôme Bourdieu et Johann Hellbrunn, m'a mis en contact avec des chercheurs français, ce qui m'a ouvert les yeux à l'épanouissement des sciences humaines en France. En même temps, j'ai établi un échange intellectuel et des amitiés profondes avec plusieurs collègues français. Et tout cela m'a ouvert la voie d'une conversation inspirante avec des économistes et sociologues français, une conversation qui continue et évidemment qui aujourd'hui atteint une merveilleuse nouvelle dimension. J'espère que vous m'excuserez maintenant de continuer mon exposé en anglais, que c'est ma langue de travail, malgré mes origines hispanophones et francophones. And I will now do this awkward shift and start by noting that sharing with you, Professor Stiglitz, this honor adds to the wonders of today's event, and not only because I have been your longtime fan, but because it foregrounds possibilities of interdisciplinary dialogue between economics and sociology. As it turns out, an intellectual highlight of my last few decades has been the growing exchange of ideas with economists. Especially memorable, several years ago, Princeton economist Avinash Dixit and I co-organized an economics and sociology workshop, the first such effort at our university and still the only one, hosting speakers from both disciplines whose work focused on the social organization of economic life. I was further drawn into the worlds of economics as member of the Advisory Council for the Paris School of Economics as it reorganized the teaching of economics in Paris, And also in Paris, as Jan mentioned, 4 years ago, I had the great honor of participating in with an interdisciplinary conference organized by Florence Weber and other collaborators for the 20th anniversary of this book on money, that, by the way, in its first printing was endorsed, blurbed, by Albert Hirschman, Pierre Bourdieu, and Chuck Tilley. At that point, I said, well, what more can I want of life? And finally, only a few weeks ago, I had the privilege of delivering the inaugural lecture honoring Elinor Ostrom, a political scientist, on the 10th anniversary of her Economics Nobel Prize. Ostrom, the first woman to receive the Economics Nobel, and now the first of two, was an ardent supporter, as some of you may know, of interdisciplinary dialogue as necessary for identifying, as she put it, and I quote, the common work parts of all this buzzing confusion that surrounds our lives. And these are interesting times for both economics and economic sociology in their separate attempts to make sense of this buzzing confusion. Certainly, we are witnessing exciting new developments within economics, as with the latest Nobel Prize awards, but don't worry, I'm not going to talk to you about economics when we have the expert in the room. Instead, here's what I see from the perch of economic sociology. After almost half a century studying economic life, and more specifically, trying to make sense of intersections among economics activities, interpersonal relations, and shared culture, I am encouraged by the newest developments in our field. So let me indulge briefly in telling you about my own path within economic sociology, although I must say that what you've done, probably I should stop now, because you've done it so well. And I want to tell you a bit of that and how it connects to more recent research in the field. And some of you will discover awards, much like birthdays, trigger such reflections on the past, the present, and the future. When I began my academic journey during the 1970s, I never, in fact, imagined that I would arrive at the center of a field called economic sociology. Why? For two main reasons. First, my attention to culture and morality in a field committed to explain the influence of social networks on the economy. And second, my push to redefine what we should consider as, quote, real economic sites beyond the standard focus on capitalist markets and corporations. So I'll tell you a little bit about these two issues first. First, the culture and morality. Again, Jeanne, you've done it. But my dissertation and first book traced changing cultural and morally inspired responses to the life insurance industry in the United States during the 19th and early 20th century. And that research is sparked my long-term interest in this mingling of morals and markets. I asked, how do these separate worlds of values and morality intersect with economic activity? And how did this deep opposition to life insurance as the morally suspect pricing of human life become legitimized in the 20th century as a meaningful death ritual, so that life insurance became acclaimed as a morally laudable economic investment in the future for the American middle class? And I followed the life insurance study with the book on pricing the priceless child, that somebody, by the way, told me, that's such a bad title at that point. Well, they were wrong. So and examined this cultural transformation that Jan already described. And like my Morals and Markets book, The Priceless Child offered a way of thinking through how Americans responded to economic changes that other people had portrayed as inevitable rationalization. This exploration of cultural transformations and moral debates may be an anomaly among scholars involved in launching the so-called new economic sociology in the 1980s. In fact, I did not even consider myself as contributing to the fledgling field. Why? Because those pioneers concentrated on social networks, deliberately staying away from meaning systems. And importantly, they approached the analysis of social relations as a context, as external facilitators or constraints on economic processes. That's what we mean by the embeddedness, encastrement, of economic phenomena in social process. Context analysts look at standard economic phenomena such as labor market, commodity markets, corporations, showing how interpersonal social networks as context shape the options of economic actors. Along with a few other dissenting sociologists, I came to challenge this context approach in favor of more subversive alternatives. In this analyse alternative, we identified shared meanings and social relations not as context, but at the very heart of economic activity, including the previously sacred and unexplored territory of markets and money. So that in 1994, in this book on the social meaning of money, I pushed deeper into economic territory, showing that all economic reasoning is in fact social. And contrary to the dominant economic theory of fungibility, I drew from US historical materials to demonstrate this relational, cultural, and moral differentiation of money, what I've called marquage, the monetary earmarking, depending on money sources, its uses, and its users. And in the process, the book mapped out, or tried to map out, a variegated, social and culturally meaningful economy, far different from the monochromatic gray world of modernity predicted by classical social thinkers. Importantly, culture in my analysis does not act as out there as an autonomous force, but as a constitutive element of social relations. As a result, where others see only straightforward social network conceptions of interpersonal ties, I find the variable meaning, quality, and intensity of relational ties among economic actors. In this alternative view, negotiated and dynamic interpersonal interactions, not the individual, become the starting point for economic processes. And to describe this process, I later coined this term that Jan mentioned, relational work. The second reason I remained for some time on the outskirts of mainstream economic sociology was my choice to focus on a range of economic spheres outside the capitalist firms and production markets that dominated the field's mainstream. And that's why, as Jan told you, I investigated such domains as intimate economies, households, caring labor, gift exchanges, remittances, welfare, and consumption. This broadened lens breaks down artificial boundaries between supposedly sturdier, real economic spheres and those allegedly peripheral, trivial economies. To be sure, we must recognize variability in different kinds of markets and monetary transactions, but acknowledging an expanded economic territory moves us away from sentimental but erroneous dichotomies. It challenges what I called hostile worlds views, splitting the world into economic activity and personal spheres, with the often perverse effect of increasing economic inequalities for those involved in the more personalized and therefore supposedly less seriously economic domains. So that I entered the field of economic sociology through a side door, and let me add also a woman's door, in a specialty where most leading scholars were men. And I sometimes wonder whether my different approach to economic activity, if my attention to meaningful relations and to different kinds of economic arrangements stems not from the fact that I'm a woman, but because as a woman working in a male-dominant field, I surveyed the economic landscape as the famous Zemelian L'Étranger, whose Simon described as, and I quote, plus libre, pratiquement et théoriquement, moins lié dans son jugement par les conventions. Perhaps, in this case, I was less beholden to mainstream paradigms of what constitutes core economic institutions. To my surprise, in the past 15 years, approximately or so, the field has turned in my direction. And it has been a delight to read the stellar work of a younger and international generation of economic sociologists breaking new ground by analyzing the meanings and morality of markets as they probe into a variety of economic spheres: financial markets, welfare economies, art worlds, markets for human goods, informal lending practices, the emerging world of cyber currencies, those are the latest, and more. This 21st century research by, among others, French scholars, US scholars, and increasingly a roster of stellar young Latin American scholars advances a truly alternative, socially based description and explanation of economic activity. These investigators are also trying to make strong connections among moral theories of the economy, ideals of social change, and public policy. I am gratified by their extensive adoption and extension of my relational work framework, which, by the way, will be documented by the brilliant sociologist Nina Bandel in a forthcoming review essay in the Annual Review of Sociology. This reminds me, and this is why I have a little bit of trouble keeping a non-tearful moment, because one of the great pleasures of my life has been mentoring and working with graduate students, and Nina Bandel is one of them. In any case, meanwhile, I'm still, and you'll discover that still is a word that comes up a lot after you reach a certain age. Are you still? Okay. I am still pursuing answers to the multiple puzzles raised by the mingling of meanings, relations, and economic activity. And one of my current projects that I will discuss tomorrow focuses on the college economy, as elite universities in the United States increasingly recruit low-income students into mostly affluent campus communities. How, I ask, do students manage cross-class relations in their everyday economic interactions with roommates, friends, and teammates? And note that for me, this means that after a career of specializing in historical research, for the first time, I'm actually speaking to live respondents rather than dead people's testimonies. Pour finir, je voudrais vous remercier encore une fois pour m'avoir accordé un tel honneur. Recevoir ce titre de docteur honoris causa à Sciences Po m'inspire à continuer à rechercher ainsi que enseigner à mes élèves les profondes racines sociales et culturelles de nos vies économiques. Merci.